another thing about the jump is in the beginning we actually had one jump, um, and that was cool. But when you missed it, it felt like, oh man, I just missed it. It was so close, or and then you were placed back. And we wanted to be again in that sort of flow that you're going forward. So we've talked about it for a long time, but we added a very small additional hop so that you can just you feel like you're kind of like a fish on the land where you're
Yeah.
like, oh shit, I and then you hop yourself towards like just enough that you can fix a lot of jumps and get back to either the shadow you were aiming for or something that was close by that you missed the one that you wanted to go for, but you're still in another shadow, I would say. And um, that was very nice addition, but that also meant that we had to redo a lot of levels because we made
Oh no.
concepts. So the range was a bit varied, so we had to fix a lot of stuff, of course.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Game Engineering Podcast. Today I am joined by Nils, who with Ewoud is developing the game SCHiM, or SCHiM, or SCHiM. SCHiM. It releases on July 18th, so pretty soon. The game is about jumping from shadow to shadow. You're controlling a ball with ice, and it's super goofy, it's super fun. It sounds amazing and looks gorgeous. Join me for the discussion about the design of SCHiM with Nils. Let's talk about SCHiM, and then maybe we can start with like proper pronunciation and then like an overview, okay? I'm doing my best in the pronunciation, okay? It's like SCHiM, like this.
Hmm.
Great.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
So
And the alternative pronunciations?
shim and skim. And
Okay.
that's what we hear a lot internationally as well, because schim is very specific, very Dutch.
Yeah.
So we don't expect anyone to do it justice and just use whatever feels right.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit like an overview? What is SCHiM about?
Yeah. So in schim, you are a little shadow creature, which is called a schim, and you jump around from shadow to shadow. And in the beginning, because in the story, you are the schim of a person. And in the beginning of the game, in I would say 10, 20 minutes of the beginning, kind of the build up, you actually see them grow up. So you start with the kid, and you can move around with the kid as well, and then
Okay.
you can jump out of the shadow, you can come back. So it's really casual, but eventually, as he grows older, things happen to him, and then he has a really bad day. So he gets fired, his bike gets stolen, a couple of other things happen to him, and then he literally stumbles and he falls to the ground, and then you get disconnected from him. So you actually get thrown out of the shadow, and that's the moment you will be on your own and you'll try to get back to him. So that's kind of
Okay.
the core of it.
Okay. And then you're trying to reach this person by jumping through shadows and pretty much
Yes.
chasing him.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And along the way, you can interact with shadows because everything that has a shadow technically has one of these schim as well, but most of them are just connected, so
Okay.
they're normal. But you can interact with them, and then you can also activate the shadow. So
Okay.
sometimes that's a sound, or sometimes it's an animation, or something that actually changes. So if you use it, for example, on a traffic light, you would turn it from maybe red to green and people start walking, or
This is
that
so
kind of
cool.
stuff.
This is so cool.
Yeah.
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 I've seen a lot of your like short videos of different interactions and this is so cool. Like
Awesome. Cool.
uh uh what's the target audience? Like what the game would be about, like who would be the target audience of the game?
So I would say the target audience are quite varied, but we try to make it so in a way that different sort of age groups get different things out of the game. So I would say the core would probably be 18 to 35, 40 years old. I would say something like that. Most of them like something else, like an indie game, a little bit of a different art style, different kind of play style. So that's probably our target audience. But we made it in a way that, for example, an 8-year-old can also play it, and they would have a different experience than an 18-year-old or a 38-year-old. Or so there should be enough interpretation possible, I would say.
And also the game would be available for on quite a few platforms, right? So that like
Hmm.
from a different can you like I know about Nintendo Switch, PC, on Steam, but
Yeah.
maybe what are the other platforms?
Also Mac, Linux. It runs really well on Steam Deck as well.
Okay.
Xbox, PlayStation. So pretty much everything, I would say.
Okay. Nice. That's a challenge, by the way, like to develop a
Yes.
game for every platform and like
Yes.
make sure that
Yes.
it works. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
For sure.
And you're making this game with Ewoud, right?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
speak to a little bit like to the roles? Who is doing what?
So Ewoud is doing the art and the programming. So he's a shader artist as well. So he's a technical artist. So he does the programming, but also the art is done in a way that it's a lot of programming as well. And I mainly do level design, game design, concepting, so that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. And can I like I don't know how to ask this, so I'll just ask straightforwardly and you'll tell me.
Mhm.
I feel like this game has like a Japanese feel to it.
Yeah.
How
So there's
how is that?
definitely inspirations that come from that as well, because in like Japan and Asian countries, they play with the idea that objects have a soul, or that's like that there's a connection there, or it can come to life. And we felt like while we were making the game, we felt like, what if this is sort of a folklore tale from the Netherlands, which doesn't exist, but what if it would exist, and how would it be built up, and what would be the rules, and what would be the story and the lore and the world, and how does everything come together? And we definitely looked at those aspects of the Japanese culture and those kind of things as well. So yeah, it's interesting to hear that you saw that in there as well. So that's good.
Yeah, it has something also, but uh, one the concept like the spirit and
Mhm.
the detachment that's one thing, but also like
Yeah.
I feel like in the character in the jump, like there's something like that is familiar maybe from Japanese works or games or
Hmm.
like something that is like the aesthetic something like it's difficult to pin down, but there's
It's kind of a feeling that you get.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
like a
yeah, yeah. Well,
feeling.
that's good. That's great. And we feel like because we've been to Tokyo Game Show and to Bit Summit,
Okay.
and we've seen like Japanese audience play the game, and it's so great to see because they really explore and try to find everything. I feel that sometimes with European culture of gaming, or like Dutch players, for example, they're more goal oriented. So they're trying to figure out how to win the game, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, this is also a game where it's not completely about winning. It's also being in the world and exploring, experimenting, playing around, having fun, kind of like that.
Yeah. So the main thing that the player does in the game is jumping from shadow to shadow and like realizing where is the path. I mean,
Hmm.
the direction is known, right? Like the goal is kind of known.
Yeah. So there's also a button in the game that helps you see whenever you feel lost or whatever, that it sort of the camera pans towards a location, which gives kind of an indication of a direction. And this is a thing that we didn't have in the beginning, but we were always contemplating adding this because we felt that it could be an interesting take, but we also didn't want to steer people only towards the goal, because like I said, you want to
Yeah.
have the player explore, but you also don't want them to be lost. But we do want them to be lost, kind of like just getting lost in the world, but without feeling lost, I would say. So
Okay.
there was this fine balance. But yeah,
So
you do go towards a specific goal.
yeah.
And I think because we sent you a build with a couple of levels, it's not as prominent in those levels. But with some other levels, you do have to change the environment a little bit more and influence it a little bit to make it go your way or to find the right path. Indeed.
Yeah. So by the way, how did you iterate it on this? Like showing the goal, because I can imagine if SCHiM had like an arrow pointing to direction, like nobody would
Hmm.
go to the other way,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
so. Have you tried different alternatives? Because currently, if you press a button, there's like a
Hmm.
camera pan to
Yeah.
the direction that you're supposed to go.
Yes.
So
So the iterations were, we also did one that showed you the end goal of the level. So that worked okay, but that felt more like an emphasis on, oh, this is the end of the level, this is how you complete it, or, and it's further away, so the camera pen was kind of longer, so we had to speed it up. So the focus was more on the endpoint instead of showing you where to go. And since we made it in a sort of segmented way, that was like the second iteration. That really helped because the player would then press the button, but it wouldn't go as fast. But most of the time, we see that the players, they press the button just for a little bit, just to know the direction, instead of
oh,
going all the way to the point and then seeing like, oh, this is where I need to be, which was
okay,
great because that way it's more of an indication of like, oh yes, I'm going the right way. I just wanted to double check, instead of being like, okay, what do I need to do next or something.
okay,
So
okay,
that was yeah, cool to see, and yeah, that's the version that's in there right now.
okay,
So yeah.
okay. That was very cool. I also saw recently the video when somebody is hitting like a ball in golf,
Mhm.
and the
Yep.
SCHiM is like, this was super cool. Like
Yeah,
to hide in the shadow. Like this was super
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Uh, for the levels, when you design this level, like where would you say is the boundary between making the level too convoluted in terms
Hmm.
of like making it in a straight path? It would probably not be interesting. So like, what do
Hmm.
you look for when you're designing a level? For
Well, it's we found out that it's super complicated to figure out what is the right balance and what not, and it took us quite a while. I spent a lot of time figuring out like what is the balance between having that feeling of exploration while still being on a specific path or like that. Um, I would say we have a couple of levels in there that are quite linear, which are, I would say, also the ones that are going to be that we showed you, and are more like in the beginning of the game, and also like a bit of, for the demo that's coming up, because that way you get a good idea of okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is kind of the direction. We have a couple that are a bit more open, and they have a little bit more paths as well. They do flow in the same direction, but there's a couple of different ways to solve a level, or a couple of different routes you could take, or like that.
okay,
So, but we noticed that if we did that, if we went all out, which we thought was really cool, and it was fun to play, but you would definitely get lost, or you definitely sort of lose the sensation of like, oh, I'm going that way. And what we do in the levels is most of the stuff goes in the opposite direction of you, because we found out that if things actually go in the direction of the flow of the level, that you can just stay in that platform, I would
yeah,
say, just join a person who just walks in the direction of the end and just stay in there until you're super close and then jump out. But it feels like the logical way to do it, but it doesn't feel like it's a lot of fun,
yeah,
or so a lot of things go in the opposite direction. And if you would go for a really open world and make it even more easier to find your path, then a lot of things can go in the right direction. But still, staying in one shadow for longer than 1.5 seconds or something, it feels off. It's you want to jump, you want to hop around, you want to
yeah,
just go your own way, and yeah,
yeah.
that kind of.
Have you tried like a super large level with like super open and with the like this direction to say like, try to go this way, but you have like thousands of jumps,
Yeah,
hundreds of jumps.
well, we've had those levels, and there's a couple of them that are still in the game.
Okay.
But after numerous playtests, we did make it a little bit more linear. So there's still lots of paths, but um, sometimes if we just kept it really open, that you could go back to the beginning, go to the middle, go to the end, go to anywhere you would like to go, then people kind of had feeling that they were like, oh, I'm going in the right direction, because they felt like, oh, this is a cool direction to go in. And then whenever they looked at like where they needed to go to do something, or to check something, or to activate something, or to trigger a story element, for example, they would be like, oh, that's where I just came from, or oh man, oh I was just sidetracked, or and then even though sidetracking is fun, you kind of want to choose when to do that instead of it just happening accidentally and then figuring out like, oh, I'm actually not doing what I wanted to do or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's super
So,
interesting. Like I wouldn't know, I wouldn't think about this. That like if you
yeah.
give like a super large level and have some story elements, like the feeling is that you're backtracking and doing things
Hmm.
again. But if you
Yes.
piece this into like smaller things, it's like
Hmm.
now it's separated. Now it's cool because there's a progression. It's like
Yeah.
nice, nice.
And there's even more layers that we kind of felt while designing. Slowly but steadily, we made rules around these, or sort of design rules, because just the idea of everything that you see is both decoration but also a platform, that was just super hard to work around, especially in the beginning where we're like, oh, this looks great. Oh, well, it's super easy, I suppose, or it's boring, or it's
Yeah.
uh, things. If a shadow is pointing in a specific direction, you kind of want to follow that as if it's an arrow. So you feel like, oh, that's this direction of, for example, a tree. I'm following that line and I'm going in that direction. But the sun can't just change per object just to make it point in the right direction. So there's these layers on top of each other that make you assume things as a player that might be right or wrong. And that became like a rule set that we had to follow, which was like extra difficult, I would say.
Okay. Okay. That's so. Yeah. I discussed this with like in terms of a point and click adventure game, like that if
Mm-hmm.
you design a kitchen and you will
Yeah.
need like a task and you will need a knife. Like
Yes.
on one hand you have a kitchen and it's very difficult to create a kitchen without a knife. On the other
Yes.
hand, you can't put the knife because like this will destroy the puzzle. In this
Yes.
way, like you have a level and you have a level inside a city, so you expect cars,
Yeah.
traffic lights, like everything, and then
Yes.
all of this cast shadow. So you need to very carefully place those things around. Okay.
Yes. And
Okay.
and and sometimes even if you have like you said the cars or something and you have a street, we had a couple of levels that looked really cool and they felt cool and everything, but it was so weird to only have cars go in one direction because the street was designed in a specific way, or then you wanted them to come from both directions, but that would break the level flow, and then you had to kind of think about like how should it look then that you expect this road only to have like a one-way direction, or we should change the visuals, or so everything's sort of intertwined while designing it.
Okay. Okay. How many other levels that are interior, or most of them are
um,
exterior?
we have mostly outside. We started off with quite a few interior design levels as well, but we felt like the sort of making a large jump feels really nice if you're outside. And some games also make insides of buildings inflatedly large or like exaggerated, or but we felt like because the art style does show these shapes that we had to fill it more with objects then, and then it felt more off. So we have inside levels where we're really happy with how it feels, and also because the building is larger or there's more rooms and everything. But if you just make a couple of rooms and you can hop around that, then you have the feeling that you want to go out really quickly. So that was one of the things we had to look into, like how many do we want and when does it feel right. And so we ended up doing less of those than we expected in the beginning. But the ones that are in there, I'm really happy with how they turned out, and I think they're quite sort of impactful levels to say.
Okay. Nice. Uh, and in the level, things move around. Is
Mm-hmm.
this when is this like an animation that repeats? So like in every time the same person will meet the other person like each cycle, or they are separate so that like you need to also adjust for the differences.
That's a very good question. And we've discussed a lot about this because the more it's sort of fixed, the less organic it feels, I would say.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, we had sort of fixed cycles where characters had the same distance, and cars and everything had the same distance. So the platforming felt really good and felt really clear. but on the other hand, the immersion broke a little bit because it didn't feel realistic. And sometimes you would like to have a couple of characters, and sometimes just one, or a little gap of no one coming, or that kind of stuff. So we actually made a couple of systems. And Ewoud did the programming for it, so I just explained what I wanted, and then Ewoud made it. But um, and we have a couple that are more like spawners that have a sort of specific ratio and a sort of kind of way of how they should place people or other things in the world. Um, and we also have a couple that are like with same kind of interval, and they come back and they are the same character. And we also have a couple of triggered ones, and they're quite rare. But especially if we create a really organic spot where characters either come or they don't, or and then we have the rule that you should always be able to jump every now and then. So within like a couple of seconds, you'll be able to jump to a next thing. So whenever that could be broken in a level, we sometimes use like a triggered thing, like a triggered person or someone who comes in a very specific path at a specific timing based on where you are. And most of the time, you don't need them, but they will be there just to guarantee the sort of flow that we want the game to have.
Okay. The guardian angels to save you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Nice.
and again, they're rare, but when they are there, they should be
Yeah.
enabling the player to just keep going.
What kind of activities can you repeat like over and over and they still feel organic?
What do you mean? Like what kind of activities?
Because like if on one hand you say that the goal is to make a world that is living but
Yes.
like organic and feels like not like not static, not
Hmm.
uh, on the other hand, if you repeat somebody walking at the same
Yeah.
crossroad from one place to another and like come back and like do this back and forth,
Hmm.
it doesn't feel, it breaks the immersion, it's not no longer
No.
organic. So like what kind of activities you manage to find that keep
So
feel
this is
organic?
this is also a thing. Like for example, the crossroad is a very good example because we do have a couple of those where you have people and they go to the crosswalk and they wait there if it's a red light, or they go if it's a green light. But they come all the way from the edge of the level, all the way from the furthest point, and they walk towards another furthest point. So these characters, if you would follow them around or stick around and stay with them, you would still see them sort of go about their business and see how they go through the world and everything. So it's not like they spawn here, they crosswalk, and then they despawn somewhere, or they quickly go off screen or something. So that also took quite a bit of extra time to get that right. And whenever something felt off, we had to trigger it all the way at the other corner of the level. So getting all these things lined up sometimes
Yeah.
took a bit of extra time, but at least you don't feel like, oh, there's a platform going here. There's a person and they want to go somewhere, and they have a sort of kind of sense of like, oh, I'm going that way or this way. And also for them, to make it feel right, they sometimes have different paths that they can go in, or different kind of things that they can flow into. So even that, if you follow the same person and you see a similar person somewhere in the world, they might do something else, or they might go in
Yeah.
a different direction, or yeah.
Okay. Okay. The golf person, is he always kicking ball in the same direction?
Well, that's another interesting specific one. Uh, the golf guy is kind of standing there and he's trying to hit the ball, but he's overthinking it a lot. So you will have
Okay.
to interact with either the ball or the person
Okay. Okay.
to make the golf
Okay.
activity happen, really.
Okay.
Um, and there's a sort of range that you can use. So there's a within specific range you can shoot the ball. So it goes in the direction of the hole and the flag, but you can still hit the hole in one or not,
Okay.
or yeah, kind of
Nice.
miss. You have to.
Nice. 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 Regarding the collectibles, when
Mhm.
you're designing things like to find in the level, I think like in terms of like game design principles, uh, you would like to reward people for the exploration, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So apart from like hiding them kind of in the weird corners,
Hmm.
where would you say is a good place to place a collectible?
I think We had a couple of thoughts about that of how we wanted to do it. So a couple are indeed placed at spots where you're like, "Oh, can I get there?" And then if you do actually get there, you're like, "Oh yes," and I got a little reward, and now I can go back, or I can take a hitchhike back or something if there's something that moves. Or um, so also there, if you go off path, we going there might be trickier, but going back is relatively easy because something will be there that actually brings you back on the path. So because we don't want you to be backtracking or doing all that stuff double. Um, but what we also do is sometimes as a more of a what we call a theater piece. So if there's something in the world um, that an object has lost their schim, then that might be a prominent thing in the world. So I think the best example would be the one that you played is in the park. Someone threw the bike in the water, so that's also kind of a story within the world. So it's not as hard to find it, but it's more like, oh wait, there's something that happened here. Someone threw the bike in the water, and now there's this little creature that's trying to find their object. And if you find it, you put it back, and then it reunites with their object, which is more of a story kind of element and fulfillment, instead of being only about, oh, it's hard to reach, so I'll be rewarded or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Will there be like an achievement for finding, for allowing every schim to find their objects?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes, yes.
That's
And
great.
playtesters have actually spent quite a bit of time to find all of them, so that's
In
cool
the
to hear as well.
short demo that you sent me,
No, no,
or
no,
the
in the
in the
longer one, because we
okay,
we also tested the long the full
okay, okay,
version, and people do spend
okay.
quite a bit of time. I think in the demo, in the playtest and in the demo, it's kind of doable. They're
Yeah,
quite clear and they're quite
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Uh, Tell me a little bit about the jump itself, because this is like the
Hmm.
major thing. You're pretty much always jumping, so you
Yes.
needed to make jump not feel like boring, like,
Hmm.
and it feels super cool with the sound design.
Awesome.
By the way, we didn't like discuss this yet, but like sound
No,
design is awesome, and
thank
like
you very
this
much. Yeah.
spamming jump button all the time, like it's so cool, and it doesn't feel, if I would make it, I'd probably do like a custom one sound that would be driving me insane after like five times playing.
Yes.
It's like, how do you do it? How do you do jump, first of all, visually, like to make it
Hmm.
cool, and then
Yeah.
sound wise?
So for the jump itself, it is kind of like a physics-based jump because it is a thing where you can steer in the world as well, which is nice in platformers. You don't want to have just a direction, of course, but it's also we made it in a way that it should be quite forgiving. That if you are not completely sure, then the game gives you a little bit of leeway as well. So if you are just about on the edge of a shadow, it kind of snaps you in a very satisfying way. Um, and also with the sound where it's just that landing sound where you're like, oh yes, I made it. Um, and another thing about the jump is in the beginning we actually had one jump, um, and that was cool. But when you missed it, it felt like, oh man, I just missed it. It was so close, or and then you were placed back. And we wanted to be again in that sort of flow that you're going forward. So we've talked about it for a long time, but we added a very small additional hop so that you can just you feel like you're kind of like a fish on the land where you're
Yeah.
like, oh shit, and then you hop yourself towards like just enough that you can fix a lot of jumps and get back to either the shadow you were aiming for or something that was close by that you missed the one that you wanted to go for, but you're still in another shadow, I would say. And that was a very nice addition, but that also meant that we had to redo a lot of levels because we made
Oh no.
concepts. So the range was a bit varied, so we had to fix a lot of stuff, of course. But it was a very good decision because a lot of people really enjoy that forgiving nature of the jump and the sort of empowerment.
Yeah.
And we really see that if a player has been playing for an hour or 2 hours or something, that they feel like they can take a lot of risks, that they feel empowered and they can try stuff. And if they don't manage to get there, they feel like, okay, it's okay, I'm getting placed back somewhere in the vicinity and I'm safe, I can do whatever I want. And I think that's good that the second jump fixes that, and also the length of the jump feels long enough. And a minor detail that we don't explain in the game, but a lot of people figure it out as they go, is that if you hold the jump button a little bit longer, that your jump also is a little bit more longer, of course. Um, which is something that a lot of people don't really think about, but they do feel it and they do act upon it, I would say.
Okay. Uh, the small hop after you land
Mhm.
saved my ass so many times, like so
Yes,
many
yes,
times. So
yes.
this was a really cool addition. Like I'm kind of
Cool.
on this uh, realization. Like I thought at some point that like games should be super realistic, you know, and like should
Hmm.
punish you for, and like there's like a special place for those games where like they're very
Yes,
punishing, but for the
yes.
most part I think like this leeway for the jump, for
Hmm.
example, it makes the whole experience so much smoother, so much
Yeah.
more cool. And the sounds on these jumps are just incredible. Like
Hmm.
both like landing and just like flop, and then like it's so cool. Like it's
Yeah.
such a intrinsic part of the game, like itself.
Hmm. There's
This
a couple of subtle things about it as well with the audio, because um, the the sh- checkpoint shadows where you actually get placed back to, they have a little bit of a different sound, but it's so subtle that most people don't realize. But I do have the feeling that most players, they subconsciously, they notice that they feel safe around specific shadows, which is kind of these shadows, because they sound a little bit different, where you're like,
okay,
oh, I think I fixed something, I got somewhere, and then they feel safe enough to also jump again. But
okay,
if players don't notice this, or they don't even feel it, then that's okay. But it is in there just to have that extra little layer of, yeah, keeping the player safe, and that they can experiment and try and risk and that kind of stuff.
okay. Tell me a little bit about the main character. So like
Mm-hmm.
the SCHiM itself. Uh, for some reason, like it, because it's like a ball with just eyes, it looks
Yeah,
so goofy. It looks like it's funny. It's immediately funny. Like uh,
yeah.
how does this come from? Like is it there's like an inspiration for it? Is it like related to the skim idea itself? Like where does it come from?
Yeah, so we figured it should be like a creature that is a bit ink-like, just like the shadows, because there's an effect on the shadows that make it look like it's kind of liquid. Um, so it should be in line with that. It's a shadowy ink-like creature. It's a bit of a blob, and it doesn't have a mouth, or it doesn't have any additional features. Um, but it does have the eyes. It looks around, and you can actually see the big googly eyes whenever it's in something or whenever you're jumping. And the rest is a little bit kept vague. Um, but I think that's important, because we do want the player to interpret and be like, oh, it's like this, or it's like that, or because um, it's kind of a figure that you, if you see it in the corner of your eye, you're still like, oh, I saw something hopping around, or jumping, or so I think that's important. And players, they tell us like, oh, it's a frog, or it's like it's like a little squid, or it's something else, or, and I think that's cool. I think it's important that a schim is kind of, yeah, part of like what you imagine it to be, or what you interpret it to be. And we have tried quite a lot of designs as well, but we always came back to, oh, but this is, it's easy to understand, it's clear, it conveys exactly what we wanted to do, and you could easily draw it, or yeah, and it's a little bit undefined, but in a good way, I would say. Yeah.
I think I saw the fan art of Schim with like super detailed building and just like eyes
Yeah.
like popping from the
Yeah.
shadow. Yeah, and
Yeah.
also like I was spooked when I saw first time like other Schim. Like I'm playing
Hmm.
my Schim and like
Yeah.
jumping and then realizing that like, oh my god, this was like was this eyes there like was this creature hiding in the
Yeah.
shadow? It was pretty creepy the first time. I was like,
Cool.
okay, okay. By
Yeah,
the way,
because most schim are like, they're dormant in their own shadow, and
yeah,
they you don't see them, but they're there.
yeah,
But sometimes indeed they open their eyes, or you see them, or they're swimming around, or they're trying to find their thing, or yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of interactions with other schemes are there?
So mainly it's about we had a couple of other tests that we did, but we brought it back to a couple of things um, because it's also connected to the collectible. So finding the objects for the other schim. So whenever a schim is in the vicinity and they're moving about in a sort of hectic way, then players always feel like, oh, they're searching for their thing. I'm going to help them.
Okay.
So if we didn't follow that rule, people would get a little bit confused. So we brought it back to, okay, if they're moving in this kind of way, then definitely you need to help them. You need to find their thing, and you can look around the area. Um, and the other ones are they're more calm, they're more relaxed. They either they guide you in the way, or they're there, or that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's the main focus of the other scheme in the world, I would say.
Okay. Okay, I think I exhausted most of my questions, so maybe we can
Mm-hmm.
turn into more like retrospective, high level questions.
Cool.
Uh,
Yeah, and audio, because you mentioned audio
yes,
earlier.
that's true. That's
Um,
true.
because I wanted to add to that Ewoud and I are the two of us, but the audio team is external. But it's hard to tell that they are external since they've been joining us pretty much from the beginning,
Okay.
and we've done like weekly calls and everything. So they feel like they're part of the team, even though they're their own company. Um, and it was really cool to work together with them. They're called Moonsailor, and they have a couple of different artists who work on different elements. So we have like sound effects, but also like the music, and so it's a bit split up. Um, and for the audio, it was really interesting because when they first pitched their idea to work with us, because we're still exploring like who is going to do the audio, they used like a trailer or something in the beginning, and they edited their idea of what the audio could be
Oh,
towards
nice,
that. So that was
nice.
really cool to just get a sort of result and be like, oh, this is what the world
Yeah,
could sound like, because we didn't know what the world sounded like yet.
yeah, and this is very
We
magical moment, right? To see your game
Yes,
without audio, first with audio. Like this is very
yes,
magical. It's like another
yes.
dimension to do that. Yeah.
And we had some ideas about what we wanted the audio to be, or what it should be about, or whatever. But um, seeing a first version was really cool, and their first angle was really a melancholy kind of vibe to it. Um, and we thought it was really good. However, we wanted it to be more playful, more up tempo, and more like, okay, I'm gonna hop and I'm gonna jump and I'm gonna go through this world and I'm gonna uh, uh, just explore everything. So we had a couple of sessions to figure that out and to get some like examples out. And yeah, that really turned out great. And once we had this sort of instruments and the sort of vibe of a couple of tracks ready, then they could just make loads and loads of tracks, because there's quite a lot of them now in the game.
Okay. Okay. How do you iterate on this? Like, I can understand feeling that like that there's like music and it sounds melancholic, even like sad, and this is,
Hmm.
sounds playful. But if you're doing
Yeah.
this quick, let's say, iteration, weekly calls, like how do you
Hmm.
convey your ideas? What would you like for this to sound like?
So we send a lot of reference things where we're like, "Ooh, this is cool, and this is also cool," and we know that they won't mix, but we like the feeling, and we like the instruments here, and we like the sort of tempo here, and we like this. So we were quite picky, I think, Ewout and I, because we both had a very much an opinion about it, even though we don't know anything about making audio. So we're probably the hardest customer to have, or the like the client
Okay.
for them.
Okay.
But they enjoyed it as well. At least they told us. So
Okay.
yeah.
And for
And
this, yeah.
I think like for the iteration, whenever they send us something, we always sort of pinpoint it at specific moments in tracks which we like the most, or the
Okay.
parts that we thought were maybe either a bit slower or too fast, or so zooming in on specific elements, so they knew what we liked or what we maybe disliked. And not just only that, but also explain why we think it would work better or would not work or work.
Okay.
So one of the earlier talks we had would be about tempo, because we kept pushing to go a little bit higher tempo,
Okay.
because I think what was important for us was once they had a couple of tracks that were higher tempo, that they liked as well, that we liked, uh, we figured that if it matches the sort of rhythm of the jumps, that felt really good. That it
Yeah.
felt like a sort of rhythm game where the music has like a double kind of speed of the actual jumps or something, and then it felt like, oh, I'm kind of doing this rhythmic kind of jumping within this world, and you're kind of going about based on the atmosphere of the music as well.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. And from the level to level, do you change this uh, tone of the music?
Yeah. So similar to what we do with the color palettes as well, each level has a sort of kind of tempo to it, I would say. So if there's only stationary objects, most of the time the color palette is also a little bit more subtle, and the music is also a bit slower, and it feels like you can choose the tempo, and it's about like, oh, like a sort of a level with more rest and tranquility, and that kind of idea. But there's also levels that are super hectic, super urban, a lot of moving stuff, bright lights, short shadows, and then it feels more hectic, a little bit more up tempo, and you feel like you have to jump faster to reach all the spots or something.
This is also super cool that because of the color palette that is very limited, you have like two
Mm-hmm.
colors plus outlines, and I think there's
Mm-hmm.
like accent color. I'm kind of
Yeah,
stealing from the background, but like I have a
yeah, yeah,
reference in the
yeah.
background.
There's
But
there's four colors per level,
yeah,
so but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And but because of this like heavy constraint, if you change one variable and like bring up the color very sharply,
Mm-hmm.
there's a vast change in the tone and the emotion, right? If you
Yes.
have like Elden Ring and you're like having like a quiet place, but it's like beautiful and landscape and things, and then you want hectic, you want you
Mm-hmm.
to do so much stuff to make it
Yeah.
hectic, right? And
Yeah.
here you can like bring up the value with like pretty much one variable, add more movement, and then it's already hectic and chaotic. So cool,
Exactly. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
cool.
And sometimes if we tune it up too much, people were like, "Whoa, this level is a bit intense on my eyes," or "It's like too much to stay this long in the level." So for a short level, it would be okay. But if we do use the same color palette for a longer level, they start being like, "Whoa, okay, I need a little moment or something like that." So that's also interesting how that affects a player, of course.
Have you already tried speed runs with
Uh,
the game?
we've done some checking, like what is possible, and we also designed it in a way that, again, you should always be able to have a flow. Uh, and also, if you start a level, we always try to find that the stars align kind of flow is kind of there. So we tested a lot that in the beginning, at least, if you make every jump perfectly, that things actually line up as well. Um, Up to a certain point, I'm sure players will break flows and find quicker ways or completely bypass stuff, of course. So, but at least it's in there for people who want to go fast or they want to get everything lined up, I would say.
Yeah. Also, one thing I did not think about it before, uh, because your game is very like on one hand it's very designed, like the shadows are there for a reason, right? Like the car is
Hmm.
not there by accident. But on
No.
the other hand, you have like for example thin shadows with somebody's hand or something, because
Yeah.
you're not faking it, right?
Hmm.
It's from the model that is
Yeah.
casting the shadow. So like
Hmm.
you get a lot of edges that people can like use to their advantage and
Yes.
like try to break the flow or like use this kind of like there's a lot of possibility to use this. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but most of the time, these kind of minor things, they they can be used, but not too extremely, because the length of the jump is already quite long, and the additional jump as well. So sometimes it's just enough to make a jump that seems impossible, or experiment or do something that you wouldn't expect, but it's not beyond the boundary of what would feel okay, I would say.
Okay. Okay.
We've checked quite a lot for
Uh,
that.
yeah, that's like in your case. I would be. This would be like the debugging process, right? Like to
Hmm.
make sure that there is no like somebody's waving his hand or something, and you can like
Yeah.
extend and break the level to do something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's a couple of animations that you can trigger, because if you land into a person, there's a small chance of them doing an animation. Or if you interact with people as well, they either sneeze or they wave at someone. Or so there's a lot of animations, which we actually did motion capture for, by the way. So we have a
Oh.
motion capture suit. Yeah.
Okay.
And and these animations, they sometimes, depending on how characters are standing, if they, for example, wave and then the shadow becomes longer, you can actually do stuff with that. But most of the time, since the animation takes a bit of time, it's not per se a faster route, but more like an alternative route, I would say.
Okay. Okay. So did you do all of the animations by yourself?
We have a couple of animations that we used, based from non-motion capture,
Okay.
but a lot of them are motion capture based.
Okay.
And especially like if story elements are happening, or if characters are, if they're, like I said earlier, theater pieces, like things are going on and they are doing things in the world, then pretty much all of those are a motion capture. I would say some animations are more based about. Um, there's, for example, in the beginning of the game, you can actually, with the kid, be on a tricycle. So then it's more about like, oh, the position of the hands is based on the bicycle, and the bicycle is programmed in a specific way, and then it's more done by programming than motion
Okay.
capture, of course.
Okay. Okay. But for the human like animations walking around or
Hmm.
running around, have you run in the mocap?
So some of them, yes.
Okay.
Some of the walking and some of the running, they are not motion captured,
Okay.
or some parts are partially motion captured.
Okay.
So, for example, the legs would then be a fixed animation, and then the upper torso would maybe be added with
Okay.
the motion capture. So there's a couple of
Okay.
interesting things and different
Okay.
combinations, I would say.
I will replay the demo and will look very closely to the animation to see whether
Cool,
I'm able to distinguish between the mocapped parts and not mocapped parts. Okay.
cool, cool, cool.
Okay. Can you tell me, like, looking back after the couple of years of development, because it's
Hmm.
4 years for
Yep.
the development, like, what would be the like takeaways in terms of the lessons from design? What would you say is like the
So
greatest
there's
takeaway?
quite a lot, but a lot of them are also very specific to
Yeah.
SCHiM, I would say.
Okay.
Um, so a lot of them are about that sort of combination of the world looking in a specific way, but them also being platforms. And um, for me, it has also been really interesting because I'm not really a platform gamer. Um, there's a lot of platform games that I actually dislike because I get stressed about it, just because if I make a mistake with a platform jump, then I feel like, okay, but I can do this, and then I do it again. But because I'm a bit like, okay, I'll do it faster because I know what I need to do, and then I mess up even more, and then I get frustrated or stressed, and I'm like, I'm trying to have fun here, and then so that's kind of a thing that was interesting for me to work on a platform game, but it's kind of a platform game, but it shouldn't always feel like a platform game, I'd say.
Okay.
So that's one of the things I learned about, like, how can I create like a platform game that's not only for platform gamers, maybe. And I think we found a lot of interesting ways to create tools in Unity as well, where, for example, the paths and the characters and how they behave and how we get them lined up and how we see them not only in game during runtime, but also get previews, and all these kind of things are really interesting to have been experimenting with and having found ways to get those right and be able to design with that. So
Okay.
that was also cool. Yeah, I think there's definitely more things, but I will have to think about it a bit
Okay.
more.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, definitely in terms of like navigating and creating the levels, you had to make from the like plain thing a path, but it's
Hmm.
not an obvious path. It's path in time, kind of like when things align. Like to me,
Yeah.
this breaks my mind, by the way. Like
Yes.
in order to like test that, it's such a and then you add, you know what? We should add the second jump, the forgiving one, and everything breaks.
Yeah.
Everything breaks. Okay.
Yes. In the beginning, I mainly did it without the tools. So I designed the level and then I played it. And then I would see, like, oh, this character is not here in time. So I would give it a little bit of a head start or change the timer in which it would appear or these kind of elements. And then that took quite a bit of extra time, of course. So then we started looking into these tools and discussing what it should do and what it shouldn't do, which is also why I think we designed those tools like three different times for different sort of things that they had to do. And we ended up using a combination of the tools depending on what we needed when and when it makes sense.
Okay. Okay. So do you have like a tool with a timeline where you have the level and you can like see what happens 5 seconds later on, or not really?
So it's more like prediction. So instead of spawning as it would use during the game, it would show sort of ghostly versions of what
Okay.
would be there on the line. So the lines are there, the paths are there, and then it would have multiple characters, ghostly versions of them being previewed. So you get an idea of, okay, it starts here, and then I would probably be around there, and then I see that there's another one going that direction. So kind of aligns, and they don't cross each other at the too busy moments or too little
Okay.
moments or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. 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 So, SCHiM releases
Mhm.
at 18th of July, right? That's true.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
True.
where people can follow the work.
So we have a website, schimgame.com. I think that's easiest. So that's SCHIM. That's Schim because it's good to pronounce it like that. Uh, and you can follow us on pretty much all social media. We've got quite a few. We just started adding each when we figured out a social media, we added one more, and then we now have just about everything. Um, Most of the time, we talk with the community on Discord, and we share a lot on these different platforms. They can also join for the Steam community. So yeah, just about everywhere that you can find on the website, I would say. Yeah.
And on Steam page, you have this lovely GIF of Discord with the
Hmm.
shadow with SCHiM. This was so
Yes.
cool, man. This was so cool.
These kind of things, especially when you were two people, it takes a bit of additional
Yeah.
time. But when you finish it and you look at it, and it's like, ah, yes, cool.
Yeah.
We're in this world again, and we can jump into the shadow of the Discord logo, and
Yeah.
let's go. I'll join.
Okay, Niels, thank you so much for the discussion.
Yes,
And this
thank you.
this episode should be like in a week, up in a week.
Cool.
Before the release, so that people can
Awesome.
can actually learn about it as well. And yeah, I just can't recommend enough. This was super cool experience to
Thank you.
playtest SCHiM, and I found out about it like a couple of years ago already. I
Cool.
remember like the first not fan arts but screenshots, and now the fan
Mhm.
arts, by the way, on X at least, there's so many cool
Yes.
fan arts. Like this is
Yes,
so
we
cool.
were super amazed. We're gonna announce the winner at least today, not when this comes out. We're
Yeah.
gonna announce the winner in a bit. So, but it was really hard to choose because there were so many cool fan art submissions, and we were super impressed by all the things that people submitted.
Okay.
So yeah, super cool.
Thank you so much, Nils,
Thank you for having me.
and good luck. Good luck with the launch.
Thank you. All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye bye.